untouched. We still have leopard sightings and deer and other wild animals in the area. And there's a very complex hydrology that is built up in this area. So it's called the House of Three Streams because you have these massive ravines that have been cut through the land over centuries, which essentially drain your rainwater out. And if you tamper with those, you're basically asking for trouble. So that's why you can see the streams that kind of cut through the site. And in a way, when you come into these regions, you really need to set up a understanding and a conversation with the land, because here topography and nature is fundamental. The task here, right, is to request the land to accept you. You don't want to go on and dominate these spaces, right? It's a question of assimilation, humility, and acceptance. So really reaching back to very simple technologies of verandas, of perch points within the trees. You don't want to cut trees. You detect spaces between them. You can actually see here where the stream cuts through, and the stream cuts through. We've really dealt with this the way the old forts have, which means when you have a ridge that is descending and it's dipping into valleys, they simply used to build a wall, their fort wall, tracing that ridge because that became the highest point for visibility, etc. So you can simply see there's a wall that forms along the site, and then the house organically starts to detect open spaces between the trees with nice views, and it spreads around, right? We don't even get into sort of critical analysis of program. We first detect spaces where the land will accept us, and then we start to push program into those areas. And it's a very steep site. It is a ground floor house, but from top to bottom, it's about 60 feet. That's almost 6 floors by today's floor-rise conventions. And that's the kind of section through the spine where we actually move through the space and the house starts to part. Yeah, I mean, I don't think drawings kind of give you the radical sense of the flow of the land and the depth of those ravines. But, and of course, now we start coming into the kind of technology part of it, that if you're building and they're very high wind speeds and it's very heavy rain. So in a way, the Konkan region has talked to us about the simple Kaula, the Mangalore-style pitched roofs. It works beautifully if your land is flat, but the moment you start to split the levels, because we don't have floor separations, wherever the land flows, that's where the house goes, right? So as the land starts to split and space starts to split, in a way, you start to reverse engineer the roof with deeper overhangs, lower rises, higher pitches, because you don't want to be running through your house, with water everywhere. You do want to stay dry in the monsoon. So in a way, you can see it is ultimately the land that is the protagonist in this project. Everything derives from the land, and that becomes the final kind of profile of the overlapping roofs, right? The way the structure organically responds to these elements in the shapes of certain structural trees, right? Also working with load-bearing elements that are reminiscent of the fort, working with the basalt from the region. And we had a very good engineer in this project where we've worked with composite flitch sections. So structural steel, structural wood sandwiched, bolted together. So you also get the kind of structural performance, but you don't get the heavy sections of mass timber. And a lot of architects, our friends who've come in from other parts of the world, they really question whether we built this wall or whether we found it. And I think that's part of the, we talk about timelessness, right? These are pictures from 2017. The house is completely different. The wall is barely visible. It's full of creepers and bougainvillea. The trees have grown. The landscape has taken over. The house is in no way as visible as it is now. And then you kind of have the heavy load-bearing elements. You have the elements that now start to float through. They're very simple veranda spaces. It's a pavilion architecture. It breathes. It's open. You can see the main ravine as it cuts through the house. It's difficult to tell really how steep it is, right? But this is the DNA of the house. This is the language. It's wood, it's zinc, it's simple natural stones. There is really nothing that is either deterministic or enforced. Nature is protagonist, light is protagonist. The breeze flows through, the light flows through. It's almost like each of these points in the house are nothing but a pause point in the journey from the hill to the lake. So it's almost about a journey with simple pauses, and everywhere nature, material, light. So in a way, if you kind of take away the deterministic expression and design, right? and you listen to the site and you listen to the clues that the land gives you and the region gives you, I think there are ways to develop this very nice balance and sympathy with the region, right? Without sacrificing that aspect that we value so much in terms of what we call design. So it doesn't mean that you have to put everything aside and not innovate and not think and not evolve and not come up with interesting spatial, tectonic, structural responses, right? You just kind of hill flows through the space. We've dealt with the entire house, so it's been now 7 years. And you won't see any fans, you won't see any air conditioners, right? Even in the peak of summer, because of the microclimate and the way the breeze flows through the house, we don't switch on. We had installed air conditioners in the bedrooms. We haven't switched them on since we occupied the house. Most of these areas don't even have fans, right? So you're literally living with the land, naturally ventilated, right? And then as you move to the western part of the site where we have some of our service pines and our cooking and the dining spaces, the forest starts to get a bit denser, which really works for us because it filters out the harsh west sun. And even the language, the kind of monolithic, slightly larger scale elements embedded into rising from the ground. And that's where you start to move through the house. We are a 4-generation, where we were a 4-generation family. My grandparents are no more, right? But a 3-generation family who uses the home in different ways. So it's a bit like a village. The upper veranda and living rooms, my parents and their friends. We tend to hang out more at that pool veranda. So it's kind of a village that forms, and you find your own space, your own privacy, but then you also find spaces to come together. So I found that kind of dispersing and pulling spaces apart is a very plausible strategy, not just environmentally, but also, I think, for the social life of the family. This is where the water runs through the monsoon, and it actually spills under. The pool veranda as a bridge that runs over the water. You can actually see how these steps move through alongside where the water would move through in the monsoon. They're very deeply vertical spaces in this area. And that's the pool veranda, which I think the trees have grown on this side. But you can see there is we use spatial tectonic structural strategies, right, to establish the essence of the house and then nothing else. So the essence is in a way visible in the language of the house. We don't deal with building a structure and then filling it up and then sticking stuff on it and decorating it. The way you build the house is the way that it exists for posterity, which is, I think, one of the lessons that we've been learning, and I think which we've forgotten as a community, right? We deal with structure, skin, skeleton, cladding, we deal with them as separate subjects. Now, perhaps for certain scales of projects, excuse me, you have to look at it that way, but I think at this scale, you are able to explore the tradition of building, evolved obviously, but the way that our ancestors used to do it, right? Really nice clean panoramas, interesting roof profiles worked up with these German engineers. And we've got this beautiful kind of pool that floats on top of 2 bedrooms. The bedrooms are submerged to reduce the build footprint of the house. It's also to reduce the access of creepy crawlies, snakes, rats, etc. into the pool, and it provides you with a very nice cool space below it. And of course, lifting you into the trees with a nice view of the hills. Yeah, and the sleeping spaces, very simple. Look, these are not ours, right? These are borrowed. The language of verandas, the language of operable louvers, of in-between spaces, right? These have existed in our country for centuries. We've simply borrowed them. And what they do in terms of light, in terms of environment, in terms of thermal comfort, right? It's so simple. There's some quota, there's some cement board, there's some stone. There are no, what we would today call luxury materials. But I think there is space, there is light, there is the ability to commune with nature in a way that really creates the possibility of true transformation. And I think that's what we really pursue. It's what we feel in our love for nature, right, is what we are trying to communicate even to others through our works. This is for filmmakers, for writers, for artists. Ultimately, there is a There is a sense of communication, of seeing something from the inside and bringing it to the outside. This becomes our medium, right? And just putting in perspective, the egos of architects, our delusions of grandeur, right? But finally, in the larger scale of things, just look at that. Yeah? I mean, these are insignificant specks, right? And I believe we need that, the recognition, right, of our temporariness in this world, right? Otherwise, I don't think we will truly be able to develop the humility, right, to genuinely preserve our environments and preserve our planet, right? So, not very far from this, closer to the base, to the Navla city. Around the time that we'd finished the house, someone approached us for a resort, right? And it's a very loosely used word because you can understand that on one hand, we talk about Lonavala as an escape from the city where you get closer to nature, the temperature is a bit different, it's not that warm, right? But what's happened is because it's close and because it's accessible, it's gotten urbanized, right? Often without any sort of urban planning, any sort of development control. So it's essentially become a city. Now, on one hand, you're talking about a resort, you're talking about nature, you're talking about openness, and then you want to start working with, again, very restrictive building codes where both in terms of land cost, in terms of density, in terms of allowable heights, they're actually prescribing a build form for you. So how do you kind of reconcile this sense of openness, nature, relevance, context, right, and the kind of developmental models that would make something financially viable for a client? Because that's, unfortunately, we are, to an extent, pawns of capital. We have to deal with that. So we've actually dealt with this subject in the way where we've separated ground and superstructure, which means there are two plots. You can see them outlined in red, right? They're connected by a space that is actually a village road, so you can't build over there. So you have about 2.5 acres, out of which almost a little over 1/4 of an acre you can't touch, and then you have this density. So what we've done is we have separated the architecture of the superstructure from the architecture of the ground. There's also a level moving in from west to east in this direction. It's sloping downwards. So we've built a ground topography, right, using monolithic elements that actually evoke the architecture of the region. Once again, it's similar to the house, right? The big basalt walls, which have actually been excavated from this place. All the materials have been used from here. So the ground steps away, becomes organic, develops a different sense of spatial organizations. And then you develop a more rigid organization for the hotel rooms on top, right? And as a diagram, that's how you work. And also because of the existing levels in the site, you're able to create these subterranean spaces to manage some of your services, some of your banquet areas, right? And you're really back to looking at the architecture that you experience up to about 6 meters, right, as a series of a different kind of space, and then the language and coherence turns, changes a bit up at the upper levels. That's actually a 50-foot tall gabion wall. So you actually see them in the landscape, but they're used for retention, right? It's basically stone baskets stacked one on top of the other, right? And again, taking away the conventional elements that would signify or determine a typology. Hotels, normally you would see balconies, you would see railings, you would see doors, you would see windows. Here, you kind of shift the attention into a different relationship between form, space, light, void, material. It forces you to engage with space in a slightly different way. And when you are forced into a different kind of engagement, that is where that little potential for change or transformation happens, right? It's very, very simple language. A lot of these louvers have now patina. They've become a bit gray. The block on the left obviously has space for an inner courtyard. And in a way, you are able to bring aspects of what you would consider to be a nature-centric, low-rise architecture, right, into a space where the building codes are essentially resisting any of these gestures. It's a very un-hotel hotel. It's the Radisson Group. Normally, hoteliers love thematics, film sets, decorations, so for the fact that I do doff my hat to the clients for even being able to assimilate some of these ideas of simplicity, authenticity, that you focus your efforts on the essence of what is going to stay for the next 45, 50, 60 years, right? So to leave raw stone, raw wood, raw concrete, no false ceilings, working with the steps, the levels, the kind of inspiration from the cones, from the stepwells, from the forts, from the bastions, right? All finding their way over here and finally looking at something that potentially belongs, right? And they've been delighted because they found that everyone from the GM to the person serving you your food to the receptionist, everyone is starting from the same base point where they're talking about the history of the region, they're talking about how the design responds to history. Architecture has actually become the fulcrum of the entire narrative of the hotel, from the GM to the housekeeping person, right? You can see receptions, zero false ceilings, raw concrete, nice slices, light pushing through, the basalt excavated from the site, beautiful play of light and shadow. And finally, the language of inside and outside, which is essentially, I think, the essence of this region, that we're fortunately not too hot, not too cold. You can be indoor, outdoor. That is the strength and beauty of these places. And the closer you zoom in, right, irrespective of the building scale, you are going to find the gestures, the detailing, the tactility of an architecture that you finally think that you can only work with this at a very tiny scale, sometimes only at the scale of the interior, right? But you can bring craft, building technologies, that same level of finessing, you can actually expand the scale of it, and that's where our research starts. Yes, doorknobs, counters, ledges. We tend to take that aspect of craft and artisanship to objects. We want to take that aspect and take it up to the building scale. We shift focus to Rajasthan, to Jaipur. I think these are all familiar images, right? And so I'm not looking at this really from the identity perspective as more in terms of how these are very sophisticated building devices. So whether you have your bowries, which are not just water storages, but they become social spaces in the summer because they stay cool, right? Courtyards, we all know. Jalis, we know the Venturi effect, we know the wind passing through, the cooling, the privacy, the craftsmanship. So a single little device, if you look at that little matrix that we had earlier, 4 of those 6 points are actually embedded in a single device. And for us, I think really this is the starting point, right, of where we need to go. I'm not going to spend too much time on the planning. It's a little, it's in Mandava enclave with a little central garden, lots of little small homes around it. But our journey starts from here, right? Now, if we talk about the subject of stone, stone has been reduced to 25 millimeters, 35 millimeters, slabs, claddings, maybe a basin, you guys, something like that. But the history of stone globally, and especially in this country, has been of the primary robust building material. Where has that gone? Is it knowledge? Is it economics? Is it time? What is holding us back, at least at a smaller scale, from remobilizing and reinvigorating these materials? So we went to the quarry, right? Not very far from the site, about 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers. The contractor, his family owns the quarry, and we basically went back to the splitting technique of stone. So before you got all these diamond saw cutters and all this mechanized equipment that is ripping out hundreds and thousands of tons of stone every day and then sending it to factories, they used to cut these blocks and then they used to drill holes into them and they used to hammer the dowels in, and the stone would split along its natural grain. That's how stone was split historically, and a lot of people still do it today. So we requested that the quarry owner do that. He gave us, there was a fair number of galis exchanged that you architects, someone says they want this, now you want to go back to this. Anyway, what it does is it brings back the natural texture of stone. You don't take stone from the quarry. If you cut it very quickly with the diamond saw cutters, it takes away all the texture. Then you send it there. Then you start doing tuck, tuck, tuck. So you build in that in-between step, which is a waste of resource, right? And also makes the project more expensive. But if we could take the stone from here straight to the site, and the site next door to the clients belonged to a friend. He didn't have a house there, so you use that open yard for construction. This now becomes economically feasible as a core building material, right? But when you start to get into stone, you forget everything that you've learned, because our engineering disciplines have been focusing on concrete, we've been focusing on steel, we have forgotten how to work with stone, with brick as primary building materials. So a basement plus 3-level house built entirely out of stone, right? How do you even start? Academic engineering, fantastic. The mystery becomes the protagonist over here. We know part of it, the engineer know parts of it. Those guys on the ground know infinitely more than you ever will, right? Respect them, learn from them, leave your ego to the side. What size of stone do you work with? With a brick, there are 3 or 4 available sizes. These come out as 16-foot pieces. You can't use the whole piece everywhere. So the mystery told us that if you cut down to a certain size, it can be handled by 2 people manually without any machinery. That became the DNA. And then, of course, you develop the corner pieces, the U pieces, the lintel pieces, all kind of evolved from that. So it becomes like a bit of, kit of parts. There are many, many drawings like this. I don't recollect the exact number of stones that we used, but they needed to be graded, kept in places. It basically, it changes the way that you engage with the construction process. So every single component, from the lintel beams to the way you cut your services, to cavity walls, to staircases, to rafts, to retaining walls, to floor systems, vaulted systems, everything has been done in stone. And the beauty of this is, today, in India, the fact that we sit on the kind of cusp of being both an industrialized economy and a handmade economy, this house was not too much more expensive, around the same as building what they would call conventionally, which is RCC frame, blockwork infill, interior plaster, external claddings, false ceilings, etc. Anywhere else in the world, you're talking about 20, 25, 30 times more expensive to build this way. Today, we can build almost at the same cost if you are smart about the mobilizations, distances, and techniques. So that's how you build the joinery. That's how people work. You can see the textures on the stones, right, coming straight from the splitting technique. And yeah, it's an interesting way to view the construction process. You often wonder, you're used to dirty site with cement mixers and scaffoldings and formworks, and suddenly you come here and you wonder, are you actually building something or are you discovering something? Are you unearthing a ruin in a way, right? And the stones that you see there were the ones that actually came out of the site, because you can see all the village homes are made out of the kind of dry rubble walls. So those were used as the retaining walls, and the other Jodhpur stones, which is the kind of harder sandstone, was used for the main structure. You can see how cavities are cut. We are bracing them with steel pins. The initial wall construction was normally what you would do for this kind of structures, you would go from maybe a 2.5 to 3 foot wall all the way to 18 inches. That's how load-bearing structures work, with reducing dimensions. Here we worked with the engineer to develop a consistent 18-inch wall section with a 6-inch exterior stone, 6-inch interior stone, and a 6-inch cavity. And then we thought through the interlocking, you would take care of all your seismic, your lateral earthquake loads. Finally, we just kept the inner and outer layer and we braced them with stainless steel pins for the seismic shear. But it also gave you an inner cavity to run all your services. Because unlike brick and plaster, you can't marrow zaris and cut things later. You have to leave all the service parts day one, because there are no false ceilings, there is no chasing, right? Thermally, the house behaves beautifully because of the stone as well as the cavities and the thickness of walls. And yeah, that's how you just basically start putting in your voltage systems for the floors. There's a beautiful piece of stone that we found on the site that I brought to Bombay for an exhibition. This is your lintel and your vault, and that's actually a cross-section of the lintel piece, right? And you look at the texture that is formed on that, right? You see the reveals that are cut through for exterior screening systems in stone, interior blinds, the stainless steel shear pins. But this texture was formed because this stone originally was used as a base to cut the other stones. So therefore, the blade would keep going through and slicing through the natural texture. And I was just wondering, is there an algorithm that could develop that kind of texture? So I think the principle here is that if you kind of understand things and you do not become a control freak and you don't become deterministic and you kind of cede control to the process, there is space for this magic to happen. But the moment you get very controlling, right, you reduce the possibility of these kind of happy situations. Structural engineering, absolute nightmare, right? That's I think a 5 or 7 foot by 12 foot slab of stone just fixed from two ends, and the engineer said, no, we have to put brackets, And the Mistri said no, and he said, well, sorry, you have to do it. And the Mistri did this, right? This is how the Mistri proved this point. So I think, again, obviously when it comes to codes and peer reviews, etc., my point is that we don't know everything, right? We need to learn from people who've been working for generations with this material. The villagers, their fathers, their forefathers, everyone knows this material. And that's the house as is, right? All those are sliding folding stone screens to build your in-between spaces. There are verandas, then there are glazed lines, then there are interior rooms. So you're talking about this relationship between the old and the new. You're talking about the robustness, the feel of gravity, of weight, of texture, but again, the lightness that is brought in. You've got this kind of monumental quality, but again, it's always, as you experience it, as you move through it, there's also a quality of intimacy, right? These open up, the house stretches end to end. It's very difficult to kind of get this done. Well, it's difficult enough here. So multi-storied architecture. Don't believe everything they tell you. There are possibilities beyond what we have seen. And you don't sacrifice, again, the quality of design, of contemporary thinking, of critical thinking, right? The stone dust was used for terrazzo. with little bridges kind of floating up there. I don't know if you studied the drawings of Piranesi, you'll start to see very narrow vertical spaces. So apart from the kind of, structural and material technology, you also have the way the house is planned with baffles in between spaces. You have to be far more rigid with your grid lines because you are working with a material that requires a vertical logic. These are your subterranean areas. You can see how the skylights start to filter through. And finally, you start to look at the emergence of spaces that are referring more to the everyday architecture of the region, because we keep looking at the palaces and we look at the forts and we look at the chhatris and the ornamentation and all those things, but we have gone back to the architecture of the village. Our inspiration comes from the robustness, intimacy, and generosity of those spaces. Hand cut, cheaper than water jet cut, not for much longer, unfortunately, right? And of course, the magic of light that will constantly happen, the transformation of the spaces, right? And finally, we don't tell the masons that you put this stone here or this stone there. They kind of, once you give them a little bit of a sense, they start to deal with it on their own. You look at the oculus in the basement, right? And yeah, just look at that detail there. They did this themselves. We didn't ask, right? And it's quite interesting. Simple hand-working tools. Yeah, so shifting gear a bit, that's a project in Delhi. It's a house in South Extension 2. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that part of South Delhi. It's become fairly dense, right? It's again a bit of a tricky proposition because you are dealing with plot, road, plots either side. It used to be fairly simple in terms of having ground plus one houses with a bit of a barsati, a little bit of a second floor for their to kind of sun terraces in the winter, cooler spaces to sleep in the summer. But all that is kind of changed, right? Again, bylaws, density, the flow of capital has essentially transformed these smaller housing societies. So that would have been the pre-existing section with the road. And you would always see a G+1 barsati. There would be a setback from the road. There would be trees. There'd be gardens. You wouldn't really see, no matter what the design of these, good, bad, ugly, whatever, you wouldn't really see the homes because you had space and you had garden and you had landscape. But the building codes have now prescribed this. Stilt plus floor, 4 levels, which means your ground is full of parking. Your buildings have come closer to the road. They've come taller. Your trees have been cut. The light is gone, the air is gone. So I think rather than looking at architectural gestures and styles, I think what you start to look at is what are the desirable parts of the pre-existing condition that you would want to recover, right, and work within this place. Essentially what happens is this becomes a critique on built environment and finally on a way of living and a relationship with your neighbors, with the community, and with whatever landscape is actually left in the region. So it's interesting because the project we have in the center, one side you have the redeveloped stilt plus 4, and the other side you have one of the old ground one in Barsati, and we're kind of sandwiched in between. So it's one of my favorite sections actually, the ability to void the street space, create more openness, more courtyards, let those courtyards flow into the basement. They're lawyers, so they're kind of allowed an office in the basement, kind of float the house above the ground, opening up the ground a bit more, let the courtyard start to flow up. See, normally what would happen is every house, most houses in Delhi would work with a C-shaped plan. They would put a lot of program in the front because that's where you can get a clean rectangle. They put a lot of program in the back, and then they link it with a central core, which means you get a courtyard in the center, which is required because you want light to come from there and it needs to come down here. But if you are able to open up this level of space, you are no longer pressured to bring light here from all the way there. So what you can do is you can typologically change the way the C-shaped plans work because they create a front and they create a back and they may create a visual connectivity, but they do not create that large-scale physical connectivity of front to back. So once you solve this problem, it now allows you to stretch space from front to back, which means some of your living areas with double heights, verandas on both sides, central courtyard pushing through stretches 75 feet from front to back where you can see trees at either end. So what you do is, it's not just about the appearance of the house, right? The appearance comes from certain critical gestures, and that come from understanding the typology that has been forced upon you by the building environment and the density that's been forced on you. That's the cross section, so you can actually see how you still have the spaces on top, which are courtyards for the upper rooms, but now I can reduce this one because I've gotten a lot of light from here, and therefore I can stretch that prism through. So what this house does is, it's structurally quite radical because it's based on a single pylon, right, almost 35 feet tall, and it's got a central core with a staircase and lift. But the rest of the house is basically asymmetric pivot. So it's cantilevering in the north-south direction, right? But it's also staggering in the east-west direction to allow you slivers of light to come in as skylights into certain spaces from the north. Because the other problem with these homes is that you always perceive this slab on top of your head. You don't get the light and the trees and the sun. So when you split these, you kind of get the sense of sky coming even into the deeper recesses of the house. So in a way, the entire house is nothing but a thermal and light balancer, a kind of conversation between solid and void. You can see towards the south how the openings start to narrow to control the harsh light, how much they start to open up towards the north. Floor plan, you've got the basement to the extreme left. You've got the ground. You can kind of see the openness in the front. You can see the footprint of the large pylon. The first floor is the client and her dad's office, and then the house actually starts. You can see how the space now stretching through and through, right? Wherein normally this would have been completely excavated from the plan. Something quite compressed about these. Anyway, it's yeah. So that's how the house kind of opening up to the northwest, because Manali, the client, she's a community person. She likes to be able to stand on a balcony, talk to the neighbor. Again, you can see the gesture of the openable. These are now mint stone screens. There are little extracts of patterns that have been put in there. Otherwise, they are fairly contemporary. That's the opened up ground space. And yeah, I think these images are kind of weirdly proportioned. Anyway, that's how the ground opens up. That pylon actually here, that's about 22 feet and another 14 feet into the ground. So it's kind of also got this little allusion to the monumental institutional architecture of Delhi. So again, you'll find that balance between scale and intimacy, jostling for space in this house. So when you look back, that's when you start to see how open your 16 to 18 feet of ground floor volume is. You kind of start to bring the garden and the trees back. That's your subterranean office with the meeting room, again, kind of connected to the trees beyond. You can see vertically courtyard, basement courtyard connecting to ground, and the small kind of shaft that brings and kind of connects the house vertically. And that's the south. That image, that's an interior courtyard image. So you can see that there's a sense of expansion and contraction based on the orientation, both in terms of privacy, in terms of light, a simplicity of expression in terms of material. The contractor was about to grind down the concrete, saying it's too undulating, it's beautiful, it's like fabric, we just kind of leave it as it is. And Delhi's houses can get quite depressing in the winter, right? So you've got this difficult balance between controlling the sun in the summer, but you really want to bring it in the winter. So you've got a nice light-filled open space. The individual bedrooms have their own little balconies with their operable screens. And one would argue that it's obviously easier, right, to bring these kind of gestures, maneuvers to a project that is maybe 3 or 4 levels, right? But what happens when you start to get a little bit taller and denser, right? For us, obviously, as a multi-storied building, Kanchenjunga is and has always been the point of reference. We worked on a project here in Bombay at 19th Road in Khar, right? And trying to understand how and it's actually beautiful views of Khar Danda and the sea beyond. That's where the site is. A couple of very serious problems, because when you look at Bombay's architecture, now that the eastern seaboard has changed, it's a bit different, but otherwise all your buildings on the west, right? All your sea views are to the west. It's also where you get the harsh afternoon sun. So as the sun starts to drop, it, comes straight into the house. It's also where in the monsoon, your wind and your rain, right? Make that west the space for the best views, but it also makes it the most fragile and vulnerable in terms of the climate, right? You drive past anywhere, Worli, Bandra, whatever, you'll see all these glass buildings. In the afternoon, all the blinds are down, so all these views that you've paid crores for have now disappeared, and you've got these miserable little 5-foot balconies where you can't do anything besides run up and down. You can't put furniture, and then you can't use them in the monsoon or in the afternoon because they're not comfortable, right? So how do you deal with the idea of working with interconnected dwellings, right? Bringing the landscape back into the project, dealing with the sun, dealing with the rain, reintroducing courtyards, essentially questioning feasible typologies for this kind of project within the city, right? It's a very, very narrow and long site. You can see the proportion in the cross and the long. It's about 9 meters max by 26 meters long, and out of the 9 meters in the center, about 4.5 meters is taken up by your core, because you're going 52 meters tall. You need your fire regulations, elevators, staircases, etc., right? So what we've done is fortunately, we could cover our cars in the basement, which left the ground open for landscape, a very, very small lobby, a kind of gym space, a multi-purpose space, single apartment, 3-level bungalow, 2-level bungalow, 3-level bungalow, and then the terrace amenities, right? But it's one very large family, families within families. You can see how these spaces start to move through. They did want a complete sequestration between bungalows. Initially, it was planned that all this would run through, right? But now they're restricted to the individual homes. They've been planned the way that we would plan a ground floor house, right? That's your south, so you've got your core, your heaviness, your imperviousness over here. West is to your left, where you have the problems of of the sun and the rain. You've got north, east. We've put a courtyard in the center, an angan, split the spaces, connected them, and built deep buffers, more to the west, little less to the east, that actually become your interconnected patios and verandas, right? So you get these spaces that are perennially usable. 24/7, you can use that balcony and you can operate it. You can operate the screens. These are your 3-level, sorry, excuse me, just give me a second. So again, you kind of let space flow through, so you allow the breeze through it. Central courtyard, dining up there, kitchen, hardcore Vastu, southeast, living room, balcony, first floor, 3 bedrooms, interconnected spaces with the void going through, and then second floor also with sleeping spaces. But the individual kind of balconies and verandas keep staggering, so you build this, this visual connectivity, right? And yeah, so that's the kind of project as it is today. These are essentially all of these terracotta colored aluminum screens can be opened, closed, semi-open. So in a way, it reads like a vertical village where there is no fixed image to the project. It depends upon the time of day, time of year, preference of the inhabitant. They open, they close, they transform. The north, which conventionally one would say, let's just glaze the whole thing. The clients put a significant amount of pressure on us. But what they don't realize is that there are buildings all around you. So if you glaze everything, you're going to be in a fishbowl. People are going to be staring at you. Instead, the entire geometry of those openings has developed through the understanding of an interior space where there's a large accessible window, where there is a smaller window for light, a smaller window for ventilation. I mean, just to give you a sense, that's about 9 feet by 17 feet. So it's not small, it's bloody massive. But by organizing these openings in this way, you've also created a situation where the building isn't open to an immediate reading. There is a mystery to it, an unknowability about it. You want to observe it, right? And this building does invite different forms of engagement. It takes the principles of low-rise architecture, individual homes, and then starts to build on the stacking. Now, you can actually see all around you, the urban environment has evolved into nothing but slabs, chhajjas, glasses, right? Here, in a way, and I don't like the fact that they took away the screens from the top, because that actually gives away the entire anatomy of the building. Otherwise, this thing was fairly enigmatic. You can see the understanding of windows, of shadings. And yeah, it's kind of a, I would say, as an urban artifact, right? It changes the way that we look at dwelling spaces in the city, not just aesthetically, but as an interpretation of what's happening on the interior. Right? You can't tell the building is 10 floors or 12 floors or 13 floors. You don't really know its use type. And more importantly, like with the Radisson Hotel, the closer you zoom in, the more you start the sense of articulations of material, structure, tectonics. That in many ways, it's we've been told that this is not something that happens in larger architecture, that it's something, you do your fun stuff over here and you go big and you just kind of keep it really simple. So again, 30,000 square feet, no false ceilings, simple raw structure, understanding of environment, understanding of livability. That's the little puja room in the northeast. Yeah, it's very simple, small lobby. Again, just opening out towards the existing trees in the garden. And these are the interior balconies. These are the living room balconies. There are private balconies on top. But each of these has its own kind of condition, its own kind of flexibility. Right? So we go back to the, again, as I said, it doesn't belong to us. It's borrowed. Right? But it's not that difficult to do it. And it completely changes the way that you can use your home. And that's fundamental, because this is about life. Architecture, finally, is about shelter for life. We're talking about a Marwari family. Again, lots of credit to them. Their benchmark for the so-called luxury and materiality of the space was the JW Marriott with lots of glossy veneers, lots of Italian marbles. And we've transitioned into raw concrete, raw steel, simple wood, Kota stone, no false ceiling, no decoration, right? But we have brought in the environment and the moments that once again, I think we associate with the journey and discovery of a different type of project that we don't associate with multi-storied buildings. The client's discourse has changed from marble and all these things. He's now talking about the fact, I'll just leave it there for a second, that he tells people that I don't need to put my blinds down because my privacy, my glare, my light, everything has been dealt with by the architecture, right? You get soft glare-free light throughout the day. I don't need to switch my ACs on until I go to sleep because the house is beautifully ventilated, but it's not letting the rain in, it only allows the breeze to come in, right? I think to take someone who's gone from the paradigm of this kind of luxury to transform the discourse to something else, right, is something that is truly, it feels beautiful at the end of a project. I think the last one, I'm not sure how many of you have visited. If you haven't, you should. This is IFB. It's the ice factory at Ballard Estate, right? This is, it's a beautiful, beautiful old precinct for the shipping offices very near the port. I suppose it's going to change over a period of time. When we think of Ballard Estate, this is the architecture that we think of, right? Edge-to-edge plots, 4- 5-storied old stone colonial buildings. But right next door, there is a different language, right? of a more industrial architecture that was used for manufacturing, for workshops, in this case, an ice factory. And Dad and I just kind of chanced upon this when we were walking around Ballard Estate one day, it's in about 2018, right? And we found this place. I mean, we've been in Ballard Estate for over 20 years, so I'm not sure how we missed it earlier. But we chanced upon it, and it just so happened, right, that the ice factory that was running here for 140 years, right, the client now wanted to, or the landlord wanted to take the major operations into New Bombay and then look at leasing some of these spaces. But, and I don't think I blame anyone for this, because the pressures of finance, of industry, etc., you kind of do what you need to do. But the condition of this place is a beautiful 150-year-old dual species banyan in this space. Its roots have been choked up. Pipes, machinery, compressors, asymmetric loadings, concrete on top of wood. Basically, they had, I mean, look, we know what happens. We have this really weird relationship with history, right? Either it's the Taj or it's Rajabai and it's put on this pedestal and we make this big, like, conservation, which is good. It needs to happen. But our utilitarian heritage, our industrial heritage, the smaller spaces that actually have the potential of becoming a part of the city and a part of daily life and part of community, they are treated really, really badly, right? So when we went in there, we didn't know what to do. We just said, look, we need to do something. What came about as food, what came about as community program, and look at the beautiful machinery, the gantries. They still have these activated pulleys that will go and pick up the ice blocks, move them. It's a magical space, but it's in and even this does not tell you beneath the surface the kind of damage that has been done to a space that is 150 years old, in Bombay with its pollution and humidity, and then with the added pressure of the thermal disturbances that are happening with ice manufacturing. They have loaded all this machinery onto wooden beams that have then been retrofitted with steel. I think this picture gives you a sense of the chaos that we encountered, right? That is your cold storage. And that's a basic anatomy. It stretches from street to street, right? You can see the banyan tree marked in the center. You look at the first part, it was called we continued calling it a substation because this beautiful old structure was used to put a transformer in a DG set. So we had to get those out. It has a very nice lantern clear story roof. The central space was covered up with a patrika, with a tin shed for the workers' housing. The ice factory, which is the main manufactory, had the north light wooden trusses. And when you strip down the cold storage, that's what we found. Right? Beams were falling, walls were crumbling. We found that foundations had rotted. It was a bit of a bloodbath, actually. So the process, once again, like with the stone house, changes. Right? You can't do this purely on drawings. You can't do this with theoretical discussions across the table. This is what you call a hands-on engagement with space, time, and material. Right? It became, and I think the language of medicine and of surgery is more relevant to the kind of forensic examination, the discovery, the layer by layer unearthing, both of the magic and of the damage, and then the process of pinning, suturing, cutting, chopping, hanging. Most of the project happened through sketches like that. And this is another very tricky part, because when I talked about history and our relationship with history, right, as I said, it's kind of bipolar in a way. It's either God or it's garbage. Is there an in-between? And we've seen it all over the world, where one can set up an equitable dialogue of being sympathetic to what was there, right, without having to mimic it. Certain types of structures require a different kind of preservation, where you know the end point, you know where you need to get. What you're doing is you're designing the journey along the way. But in this kind of subject, where you are engaging equally with history and setting up an equal conversation, that sense of speculation is the beauty of this process. How much do you bow down How much do you shake hands? How much do you turn your back, right? So we went through, apart from all the technical understandings of structure, foundations, relieving roofs, etc., the philosophical conversation that happened here was the hardest part of the project of how do we start to extend and cover parts of this project that were not covered earlier, right? And I always go back to what Khan said about the bricks, that you ask the brick what it wants to be, right? So we took the north lights that existed, we simply pulled them towards the west. There is a 2-floor residential structure next to us and a masonry wall that divides this from a little connection space here, right? So we pulled the north lights and we simply chamfered them down so you could preserve the light and ventilation of their homes. And therefore, a kind of hybridization or mutation happened simply through the understanding of history and understanding the evolution that you could subject it to without inserting or enforcing a brand new language. And then we simply took the north lights, cut them down, rotated them 90 degrees, they became tighter serrations and became east lights. So with one single gesture informed by what existed, we have now created a mutated addition to the space. And then these became the new structural steel inserts. That kind of talks to you about the overall anatomy of space. We are still planning a 200-seater black box on a subsequent terrace, but that's not been executed right now. That's your substation with the lantern lights. You can actually see that we had a courtyard now. This kind of space needs to be perennially usable. We do face problems in the monsoon, but we did create this courtyard covering by essentially taking the lantern and using the shape of the lantern to form a truss supported from here to here, and then the members supported on that truss, which means the members could also be cut back every time they were kind of overlapping with the banyan tree, right? So you've kind of used the same language, the same form, but you've reinterpreted the structural strategy and behavior. And that's currently where we are. That's the chimney that belongs to clearing house. Those are your east lights. The anatomy of space also reflects the planning of Ballard Estate, where between these buildings there are narrow streets and then there are courtyards which currently have been disused or used for generator sets or storage or parking. But in a way, subtly, there is a sense of the larger urban strategies finding their way into internal planning strategies. We have used some of the old coils from the landlord, embedded them in the floor, so you've got this sense of archaeology, which has been an aspect of the entire process of digging, uncovering, rebuilding, reinterpreting. That's the substation. The roofs had completely, sagged, so they had to be jacked up, they had to be kind of braced. But you also see there is an attitude here, and everything here, every gesture, right, every technical gesture is basically informed by the relationship with history and time. So even the ability to slice through the brick to create a connectivity, insert 2 steel supports that become anchors for the truss. When you lift up the roofs, the little sliver of glass that has formed. So everywhere, you'll be able to subject this to the examination, and everything kind of ties into a core philosophy, to a core essence, in a way. And of course, the heart of the project, the reason we all came here, right, was that. So we kind of uncluttered it, opened it up, gave it space to breathe, everything centered around it, and therefore, it's actually become an exercise in microurbanism. So even though it's not a massive space, because of the way spaces are organized, aggregated around this courtyard, the way they are accessed, the way they are used, it becomes a little micro-urban design, food, community precinct, right? Even things like a staircase giving access to the terrace. There's a door behind it for a restaurant. You see this junction here on the wheels. We need to kind of move the staircase out because that's part of a fire escape, right? So there's this really kind of close, entangled attitude to this kind of space. That's the cafe. This is the cathedral. Now, we've called it the cathedral because it's one of the new spaces that has been formed. The first exhibition was supposed to be Peter Rich's Temple of Light, which is currently on display in Hyderabad. It's an installation from the 2006 Biennale. So we called it the cathedral, but this is where you can see how the north lights have come, dipped down, and then formed iterations to allow north light and then rotated there to form east light. Now, you can see the north-facing glass here opening up to the banyan tree, right? And there is a story inscribed into this element because the anatomy of the north light dipping down, of the language of the lantern, it is all inscribed into the structure, almost like you would etch, the palimpsest that you uncover. The story of the recoveries, the interpretations, the extensions are actually drawn into this if one is to observe it a little bit carefully. It's got a beautiful volume of space, beautiful light. The old stone has been redone. You can see where the old brick is, where the new brick is. We're not kind of self-conscious about, what was, what is, and we will let them, continue their conversations. There will be a next evolutionary step in this as well. At some point, this will turn into history, and something else will have to respond to this, and that's how we have to treat our spaces, that they are going to have an afterlife, in a sense. And that's the beautiful ice factory. It took 4 months to scrape away plaster. It was between 2 and 2.5 inches thick. Half the time when you were chipping it, the bricks were coming off. So in many places, we actually left the damaged bricks. It's had an added bonus of giving a very nice acoustic quality. That sound kind of bounces off the frayed edges. But you uncovered, once again, it's beautiful, I think, and it's sad because these exist as part of our daily lives. You see, there used to be an old hatch, there used to be an old arch somewhere over here. All these layers existed and they've simply been, we've just let it be, right? Our role has been not of author, but of catalyst. That's the bar space. You can open up the partitions and combine them. The soul of the space, what it was envisioned for, right, is for community engagement, for architects, for artists, for musicians, for filmmakers, for activists, right? So this was part of our inaugural programming that we had put together with an artist friend. It was called the Unmaking and Remaking of the Ice Factory. We had sourced old drawings of the ice-making machinery and mounted them. That's a sculpture we designed and built in-house as an interpretation of energy diagrams for Ballard Estate. It was nice to have the students welding, threading. We had Elise doing a performance piece, but you see that paper behind her. So we'd activated the gantry and we'd hung charcoals. So there was kind of automation drawing happening on those charcoals behind her as part of the piece, because you have the gantries that move, which were picking up the ice. We hung a bunch of charcoals, and as the gantries moved, they started dragging marks across the paper.
It is a resonance. But it's an idea of bringing us closer together, because architecture is not about buildings, as I've often said, it's about life. And we need to embrace life.
Like a rustic place, but that is what nature is. Where it's such an incredible space, where it seems like anything can happen and anything did happen.
I think it's a really beautiful space, and really love the tree in the middle of the space.
It was something new for me.
And it was just intimate. It was really nice. So it certainly has a much wider perspective than simply being confined to this spot at Ballard Estate.
Super. So I think that's pretty much it. There's a lot more, but I thought we'd condense it and just kind of express an essence, a cross-section of what we're doing. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. 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 But yes, thank you so much for such an insightful session. I'm very, very sure that each one of you must have absorbed maximum through this session. Now, I would want to ask the students, if you have any questions, then please feel free to ask. Or else I'll go to my online questions that have been asked. We had plenty and we shortlisted top 3, so I'll get that floated.
Can I sit there then at least, or do I have to stand?
No, you can stand.
Sitting is fine?
Yes, that's fine.
Cool. All right, good.
That's
Let me
fine.
just sit down.
No, okay.
Anji.
So, guys, no questions? Oh, okay, we have one question.
So you had talked about the essence, right, in every project here. How do you find that essence?
It's a very good question. There is no set formula. I think you mentioned that this entire platform is called Grow Her Intellect, right? I think what Dad, and perhaps he articulates it a lot better, is his understanding of intellect, intelligence, and intuition, right? These are 3 different things. What we have come with, what we absorb as knowledge, right? And the last one, intuition, which is something that is collective and intelligence embedded in humanity, what we call the gut, the 6th sense, right? Which has been gradually erased in favor of learned forms of knowledge, right? So I think part of this process is to listen, to be able to establish an inner silence so you can hear, absorb. What I didn't mention about, then a very good example, I don't know if you guys remember your science class in 11th and 12th about the tuning fork. You know how you set frequencies, right? That is in itself a form of balance. So how do you tune yourself into the frequency of a situation? Now, it may be the vibrations of a site as it was in Pavna. It may be the frequency of another person, right? Situations are complex. I can't tell you that here you should do this and here you do that. I think part of it is experience. You learn, you know, you start to understand what is important, what is not important. Sometimes you lose your way, you lose your balance. You hope that you have the internal mechanisms to autocorrect, or you believe that you have a trusted environment around you that helps you course correct. So all of these are actually organisms, right? Self-regulating organisms, whether it's your own internal processes or it's a group of people. You have to learn when to listen to your head, when to listen to your heart, when to keep quiet and listen to someone else, when to speak. Yeah, there is no formula here. This comes down to individuals and groups of individuals who have, if you believe in the same things and you have the same broad sense of what you prioritize and what you value, I think you tend to find, but you really need to be very, very aware, because it's very easy to lose yourself and lose the process in favor of economics, ego. There are many things that will distract you and disrupt that balance, right? Keeping it is not easy, so you kind of need to have a certain amount of, call it conviction, right? But conviction very quickly turns into rigidity, it turns into dogma. You keep writing your new Bible every day and then you're afraid to pull out that page and throw it away. You know, it's a constant process of evolution and discovery. Yeah. So I didn't answer your question, but I'm sorry. I don't really have an answer for it. Yeah.
I'm sure he's content enough with that answer. Are you? Are you content enough? Yes. Questions, guys? Oh, I'm happy. Yes.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'm Tapasya Mohante.
Hi.
And actually, I just wanted to, I'm very curious about how you perceive architecture. Like for you, what is architecture and what is your design process? So because even when I took architecture, I don't know why did I, because of sketching and other things, but for you, I'm very curious to know,
So even I don't know why I took architecture, apart from the fact that my father was an architect, right? It wasn't a passion that I was born with, which is kind of odd. I thought same thing. I was half decent at sketching, not even very good, but okay, whatever you draw, mama papa bolenge, yaar, bahut acha hai. Acha. So I thought this would have been the logical and the easy way out. And I was in for a very rude shock. I struggled. 3 years, I was practically failing every single subject at academy. I think after 3 years, if not passion, but at least some modicum of self-respect that at least don't embarrass your father, kicked in, and I at least put in the work. So I think my relationship with architecture has been a gradual and strengthening love affair, not the way that others maybe would have been conditioned. So whether that means that I perceive it differently, right? I remember saying unbelievably stupid things in college. I mean, you won't even imagine it. I remember KRVI students had come over for a joint debate, and one of my friends, also Carl Wadi, I don't know if you know him, Hafiz Contractor's nephew, right? He and I were both cut from the same cloth, troublemakers, right? So someone was saying Khan is great, and this guy's calling him Louis Khan. He doesn't even know his name. And someone is saying Corbusier is amazing, and I said, well, Chandigarh is a disaster. Just we didn't know, right? So I think the pursuit of learning, understanding, falling in love, developing, etc., happened much later. It's formed a different sort of respect and a different sort of strength, right? So I can't tell you how I perceive architecture, because I believe through my words, through the way I talk about the work itself, I think that the nature of discourse and the practice has changed. You will find, I think if you speak about things differently, right, if you start talking about empathy, if you start talking about balance, if you start talking about essence, if you start talking about generosity, right, either it's just lip service that you use these words because it's trendy and colloquial, or you actually begin to understand what they mean and they start to find their way into your process, right? Things start to happen. So look, in a way, it's very easy, but it's also not easy. And it is a process, and it requires an immense amount of patience. So you guys, I mean, I've seen, younger practitioners coming into the office, students, interns. There is this sense of impatience that we need to do it, and we need to do it now. This is a slow burn profession. Projects will come, they will go, they'll be under construction, they will stop. You are at the mercy of a lot of forces in this discipline, right? And so I think that resilience, how to be passionate without becoming emotional, how to be attached whilst being detached. See, these are lessons for life. The practice is just an analog or a metaphor for these things. Without these things, it's difficult to, and I feel horrible because I just came back from Helsinki. I make it a point once a year I travel just as an architecture pilgrimage. And I see Roosevelt and Alto and Siren, and then I see the new practitioners, and before that I've seen Scarpa and Corbusier and whatever. And you just think, can we ever build that way again? Or is it gone? So therefore, with Pavna, with the Stone House, we keep talking about bringing in an aspect of belonging from a different type into these projects, because that's how we perceive architecture. We believe that those are things that are precious and they shouldn't be lost due to time, economy, Instagram, social media, misled people. How do you preserve that integrity? And therefore the essence is important. You have to capture the essence, because many things will change, they will come, they will go. You have to define what that essence is, and you hang on to that for dear life. Everything else is just details.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I'll take this last question in that case, and then we'll wrap it up.
In the beginning, you had this slide where you talked about equilibrium, and it had 6 different elements, and how our design should reflect these elements. For example, religion, climate, social, etc. So I just wanted to understand how we can reflect the metaphysical.
Did I write, was religion on that matrix? If it was, I should take it off.
Regional and cultural, sorry.
Thank you. Very important.
My bad, sorry.
That's okay. It's very, very important, yeah. What's the last part of your question?
So I wanted to understand how we can portray the metaphysical element.
You can't.
How can we even understand the metaphysical element? How do you explain it?
Can you describe to someone who has never been by the seaside and walked into the sea, do you have words to describe how that feels? The sand, the water, the breeze, the sound, the light. Can you describe it using words? Difficult. You can put the words together. Will you explain, can you communicate the richness? Right? So there are certain things in life that cannot be defined. You cannot say, I thought A, therefore B happened. It is those literalisms that are pushing us into a difficult space because we are being forced to first develop a language using words, right? And then we're being forced to put those words into bricks and mortar. And then again, we're taking that bricks and mortar and we're decorating it with words, right? Regional, you can express, right? Climate, you can express. Function, you can express. Program, you can express, right? Metaphysical is a way of being. You can't express it. And I don't know how to. You know, it's either you're there, either you sense it, either it finds its way into your life. If it finds its way into your life, chances are it'll find its way into your process, right? I can't define that. That's a personal journey, my friend. Yeah? So maybe I should take it out of the matrix because if people say if it's not, you can't define it, then don't put it there, right? That's how our world works. You know, you have to be able to say it. You have to be able to. We live in a world where representation has taken over reality, right? The virtual life of a thing has become more important than the thing itself. How do we deal with this situation, man? We're in serious trouble. You know, it's more important that you get those few stupid images out there and everyone is ha ha he like thumbs up, whatever it is, than caring about what's actually, and it's not just architecture, it's every part of the process. Everything has been reduced, everything has been condensed. If you can't say it in 30 seconds, you can't say it. You can't say it, and that's it. You know, imagine taking a beautiful movie and saying, no, you please turn this movie into 10 seconds and you tell me all about. You can't do it. There's a point beyond which you cannot reduce reality. Then you lose the essence. So what we're searching for is how much can you reduce till you come to that point where if you reduce it any further, then you've lost it.
Thank you. I will have the questions. After this, we will have So being settled there, he will be doing something interesting for you, and then you can run him through your questions.
I was not aware of this.
Yeah, that's a surprise. Okay, so
All right,
I'll let
please.
that sink in within him. Okay, on behalf of Team NASA, we have Zonal Head Maz Multani, who would want to thank you, and I would rather let him speak than me. So yes,
All right,
Maz.
cool.
First of all, good evening all, and on behalf of NASA India and on behalf of Grohya, I would like to thank architect Arjun Malik sir for taking out his precious time and coming here for the session. Secondly, I would like to thank all the wonderful students on behalf of NASA India who came here and was expecting an interactive session, and I hope that it was fulfilled. And thirdly, Groha, I would like to thank Groha who arranged the session with architect Arjun sir. So yeah, and I would like to thank all the other team members and the members who all supported in hosting this event. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir. And we wrap the session. Before we wrap, I would request everyone to have a quick photo,
Yeah,
and
cool.
then,
All right.
then, come on, guys.
Wouldn't it be better if I went there, you took the photo this way? I mean, I'm making 50 people move.
It'll be this.
Oh, you
this
need?
is-
Okay, fine.
everything.
I'm standing. You guys go where you